Okay, so the expanded track 2 videos are going to be working with the technical drawing, and I have the notes here. So I have the 12th. Pretty much if you go on to Amazon, any of the textbook resellers, you can find one of the technical drawing back to about version 9, the 9th edition. Is pretty good. I'll check the 8th, but you can find these for $5 or $10 with $4 or $5 of shipping. So pretty much under $20 you can have the book in front of you. There's a lot of good information as a technical reference and mechanical drafting, detailing, design access. So we're going to be working out of these parts, and the figures. If I remember correctly, there's 80 or 90 figures before we go into the assemblies, and I've picked out a few to act as the track tube. But as we go further, there are a lot of things that I want to include in the conversation that haven't been able to so far. So our first pass at this, getting into the drawing, is looking at this model. There are a couple strategies. And the figure we can break into a couple of major components, and traditionally that's the way I would start. I see kind of the rectangle. If I note that this is the top plane, then over here would be the right plane, and the front plane would be, somewhere. And because we have symmetry, really I want the front plane to go right through the middle of the part. Anytime I can utilize that symmetry, that's going to be helpful for us. So I'm going to fly this out of the way, and we don't have any real reference going on here. So the top plane, I can click on the top plane. If we're in the sketch tab, I can click sketch, or we can go the other way and I'll click sketch and it will ask me which plane I want. I do a lot of pre-selecting. If you've watched any of the other videos, I think it's faster and improves the workflow. So again, whichever method works the best, allow it to evolve and expand as you use the software more and more and get further into the design elements. All right, so if I right click, and the very top left is going to be sketch, that puts me into the plane. Because it rotated over, that tells me that under my options, I have in the sketch, system options, sketch, auto rotate view normal to sketch plane, on sketch creation to edit. All right, so if I don't have that turned on, it's going to stay in the ISO, and I'm going to have to hit a Control 8 normal to, or the space bar, and select the current face. It's just a little easier to have it rotate initially. So being in the top plane, I'll fly this back in a couple times. I can either start from the point and work backwards, or start from the left side and work forwards. So it just kind of depends on how you see it. One of the things that comes up, at least initially while you're learning, don't worry too much about the orientation. There will come a point where I look at this and I say, I really want this to go into the assembly in this orientation, so I'm going to put a little more effort into creating the figure, the model, to retain that orientation. So that being the case for now, we're going to draw in whatever is convenient. So if you happen to pick the front plane, not a big deal. Just keep going with it, and we will build in and work with it. All right, so on our tools, we have the line, we have the corner rectangle, the slot, circle, center point arc, the polygon, splines. Each one of those is going to pop up now. So ellipse, not quite used to that one. The sketch fillet, and the plane inserts a plane into 3D Sketch. I'm going to say stay away from that one for now. And the putting text, and then points. We don't use points too often, but they are available, and when we need them, they are handy. So if I go into the rectangle, and we just draw from left to right, and there are two methods. I am a click dragger. If you are a clicker, that's fine. The click is to click once, come over to the other side, click again. And depending on other softwares that you've used or where you're coming from, one of those is going to be easier for you. So I'm going to hit a Control-Z on the keyboard to undo the last rectangle. And when I look at this, everything in the geometry is in blue. And so as I drag that around, it's not staying defined. It doesn't have any dimensions. There's no real form to it. So when I'm looking at this this figure, what I'm trying to achieve is going to be this rectangle across the bottom base and then the extrusion up. I could have just as easily drawn the rectangle this way and gone both directions and then build the geometry out of the front. So in this one, since I picked the top view, we're going to start talking about the relations. And first rule of our relations is some piece of geometry needs to be connected to the origin. And that will be for every part, every time, just the way it is. So I can select and hold down the Control button and select. That one hovered over the midpoint. Probably should bring up a real quick point on the hide show items. Watch out for clicking on the hide all types, which is the larger of the squares. Try to stay in that arrow. But when you look down through here, there are lots of geometries, so showing the origins and sketch relations are going to be a couple of the items that we'll toggle on and off as we need them. So by default, that is probably on. And right now, 4 little green boxes are not too annoying, but as our sketches get more complicated, they will become a lot more annoying. So I would say go ahead and turn that off. The difference is that when I pick on something, it's only showing me the relation for that item. And so as I hovered along in that selection, there's the midpoint. That of course is my endpoints. And depending on the geometry, I'll get different results. So sometimes I need that midpoint. Sometimes it's just going to be on the line. And when we go to Control select the origin, then on the pop-up I'll see midpoint, or I can come over to the left and make it a midpoint. The other method is if I display delete relations. Nope, I need to do the add relations. So it's buried under the pull down. And if we go to sketch relations, then I select the entities and I don't need to hold down the control buttons. All I need to do is click on the entities. Alright, so that gives me a location. The line goes to black. The endpoints are still in blue. And instead of rubber banding all the way around, it's kind of locked in that position and establishes the symmetry for the part. So now we need to apply some dimensions. If it doesn't matter how big or small it is, then we can put in whatever numbers, leave it undefined, and we'll get something that sort of looks like a safety key. All right, we're trying to have a certain measure of control, and if at the end of our game is that we want to manufacture this part, that whether it's 3D printed, whether it's traditional machining methods, somehow, some way this is going to get made to serve whatever purpose. So our width, or what would be the depth, 2 inch 40, and we are 1 inch 112. Also, we have to make some decisions about our tolerances and stack up. So when I see the 1.12, I instantly think 1 1/8 or 1 inch 125 as the 3 decimal place, taking it out to its non-rounded number. Same with the 1 inch 1.38, I think 1 3/8, and that would be 1.375. So if we're going to go through and build those numbers out, then it's going to affect our tolerances. Do we need the tighter tolerance? Is this going to be a plus or minus 10 thousandths? That's something that we're going to build into the title block, and we need to take into consideration. So some of these numbers are going to play out and be a lot more critical. on our first pass, and because we're just getting going, we're going to stay with the 2 decimal places, but keep in mind that at some point we're going to have to take into consideration that that is really 500. You know, the 0.44 is probably 7/16.4375 if we really want to take it out to the 4th decimal place. Alright, so applying a dimension, I can go into the Smart Dimension, and then I'm going to click on a line. My preference is the object, and when I select the line and then drag off some distance and select a location for the dimension, then I can enter the value, 2.4. I don't need the trailing 0. And our width was the 1.12. And that places it in position. Alright, so when I go into the features and we extrude, I can kind of drag this out, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time. Our height was 1 inch 900, and I might be able to get there. I'm going to get pretty close, but I'm not going to worry too much. If I double click in that area, it was already highlighted in blue, so I could have just started typing. But if I go ahead and enter in the 1.9, that will set for the entity. Alright, so picking the next face, we have a couple of choices. If I wanted to work from this top face and make this material removal from solely the top, I can do a couple of rectangles, or I can pick from the front face and go that way. That could go from the top face. It also can come from the bottom. So we're making a lot of little decisions as we go, and we design for convenience and we detail for manufacturing. So as I go through the process, we'll stay with some that are easy. So it rotates over. I'm going to draw the rectangle a little bit of ways so that I can get that midpoint again. And I'm selecting the first origin, and then I'm holding down the control button, selecting the line and telling it that it's a midpoint. Because this is still the context menu is still up, I can come right over to Smart Dimension, pick the line, place it, and then its width is going to be 1.4. The depth, 0.4. And then when we go to extrude, if I do the extrude boss base again, that's going to make a positive. That's going to make a volume. Where we want to remove the volume, we're going to do the extruded cut. And that is going to be a blind-in condition if we wanted to enter the value, but if the 1.9 dimension changes, I want this feature to follow it. So I'm going to give it an in condition that says through all. Alright, so regardless of how big or small that part gets, we will always see that cut. Opening up another sketch. Now I'm just going to go back into the rectangle, and if I hover along that edge, I'll see a little yellow box that tells me that that point is going to be coincident. And I start my rectangle and I drag to the other side, and I see another little yellow box that's going to tell me that it's coincident. And if I right click and select, then I am able to drag up and down. So pretty much I'm exiting the sketch, the rectangle command. And then we need to orient this to the part. I could, or to the origin. I could apply dimensions, and then I could also go into the line and apply a center line. So if I go to the center, notice that that isn't quite horizontal, but I have a horizontal relation available. That will pull it into place. And I'm going back to the select. The other thing that I could do is that right click and select midpoint, and then come over to the origin, and those 2 points would be horizontal. It has the same net effect. So there's a few ways to get to the end result. All right, so this width is 1 inch, and then we're going to go into the features, extrude cut. When I do the extrude cut, it rotates into position so I can get that visual. The depth is going to be 0.4, and that gives me my shape. Alright, so we have the left side. If I go to the top plane, that serves the same purpose as if I was to pick on the bottom of the part. I might notice a little different in the orientation for the sketch. If I'm on the top plane, I may be looking at it from, the top down, or if I pick the bottom of the part, I may be looking from the bottom up. So it's just kind of a just as you go thing. So if I hit the sketch and we rotate over to get the perspective, then I am looking at it from the bottom of the part. So to get back, I'm going to do a Control 6 on the keyboard is going to take me to that bottom view. And then because this has symmetry, I'm going to go back into that little arrow next to the line, pick the center line, and we'll just go ahead and bring a center line all the way out. So center lines are going to be handy for creating the mirrors. And I can select, and to generate the geometry for the bottom edge to the point, we can have that shape. So a line is also a click or a click drag, and we're pretty much generating this edge. What we don't have is something to close this off. So if I leave this open, it will generate what's called a thin feature. It'll see this as an open profile, and it will want to give it a wall thickness. So we don't want that wall thickness, so I'm going to come back and I'm just going to close that off to the center line. I could go ahead and complete. If I had mirrored it, then it would have generated. So we would have just gone to the other endpoint. When we select, if I go from right to left, we're going to get everything crossing the window. If I go from left to right, we get only what's in the window, and it doesn't matter top to bottom. So if I go up or down, and as long as I'm going generally from right to left or generally left to right, that's going to affect my selections. All right, so pre-selecting, I can go into the mirror entities and I will get an immediate result. If I want to see a preview, then I should probably go into mirror entities first, select the center line, then select the objects, and I'll get a preview before I select it. But most of the time, if I'm pretty confident that I've got this where I want it, where I need it, I will go ahead with mirroring and ending up with the other result. So our overall length is 470. And I could pick the origin, I could pick the back face, anything that any edge, any object that can be projected into the sketch plane is going to be valid to apply a dimension and create the geometry. If it won't let you apply a dimension, then we need to evaluate our selections. So overall length is 470. The width of the tab is given as 700 from the center, and that may be a little confusing. I think in terms of adding that 0, even if it's 1 inch 120, 4 inch 440, or 440, 760, it puts it into that thousandths of an inch, which is going to be the more common terminology we're working from. So I'll try not to make that too confusing. All right, so off of the center line, 700, or if we go to the from line to line, we can go 1 inch 400. All right, the other thing is this line, after it's mirrored, you'll kind of see a point right there at the intersection. That's one of the notations that it was mirrored. So that gives us our geometry. And we need to set an angle. So anytime you select with a dimension 2 non-parallel lines, it is going to automatically shift to an angular dimension. So we're going to place 60 degrees. And then when I go into the feature and tell it to extrude, it's showing me the direction that it's selected, which is away. And this would, in previous versions, previous to 2000, okay, way back in the early 2000s, this would have created a disjointed figure. Now it would just create 2 solid bodies. Right, so we'd have solid body on the left, solid body on the right, because they're sharing an edge and there is no overlap of geometry. So I can reverse it. So anytime you see the little box around one of the items, you're going to be able to reverse the direction. You're going to be able to make that selection. So in this case, apply draft. If it doesn't have the box, then you're just entering information for that, that group. I can also come out and grab onto the arrow and drag it the other way. All right, so it gives me my dimension. We're going to go in with 1 inch 120, and that gives me the depth. All right, for the hole through, I'm picking on the face. I could pick on the front plane, which bisects the part. The only thing is that I would have to make sure that my extrude goes in both directions. So if I can get the geometry on that face and have it carry through the entire part. So our dimension is for a 1/2 inch. So 0.500 and 0.5. Off of the base is 0.56. So 560, if we were carrying that out, that would be 9/16, or 0.5625. And then the 1.380 goes to the center. And then when I do the extrude, and that, because I rotate it over, it's not going to automatically jump too much. And then we're going to give it a through all. And this is where we can start to see the results of the end condition. So through all finds the last piece of geometry and terminates there. If we go up to next, it's just going to look for the next face. And both of those, in this case, end up with the same result. So go back to the front, and one of the things we'll need to watch out for is the direction of the cut. So if I open a sketch on this face, it's going to be just like I go normal to. So Control 8, and notice it rotates around. We would generate the rectangle, and the rectangle would kind of go off at an angle. We want it to go straight through the part. So in that case, I'll pick the same face, and we'll generate a little rectangle, or that would give us a closed profile. Because this is the only piece of geometry, I do want to watch for that midpoint. All right, so there's a midpoint. That's not quite what I want. That's going to define that point at the end point of the line at the midpoint. That's not really a desired result. So if I draw it off a little angle, I can always come back and apply the relation and make it horizontal. Now when we apply the dimension, we are 0.76, so 760 on the width, and then the 440 on the height. And we'll go ahead and extrude cut. And because this is an open profile, they added the blind in condition, which was nice, but I'm a little torn that they made it the default. Through all is typically what we're going to end up with on our open profiles. So being the most common, I would have preferred through all, but we can go ahead and make the cut. So we'll deal with through all and the end conditions and open and closed profiles, contours and regions as we go forward into the next version.